presentation is to talk about this emerging research framework, mainly focusing on doing visitor research, and it's emerging from different fields, so I'm not going to just use material coming from archaeology, because frankly there isn't much as far as user research is concerned. And I'm going to, the presentation is going to echo a lot of the points that previous presenters made, and also some of the questions that were asked. And probably is going to disagree with some as well, as it should, hopefully. I'm going to put things in a wider context, and as I do that, I'm going to start by explaining why digital is in parentheses there. So there are three main reasons why, and two have to do with users or participants. We don't have one term to actually describe the people that take part in public engagement activities. And it's a combination, so people use a combination of engagement modes. And the people, even those who tend to use more digital resources, we all inhabit a physical world. So it's not just about digital resources. Those resources are used within a physical context. And that merging of the two has been facilitated and actually accelerated through what we call now ubiquitous computing or embedded technologies. So what I'm going to propose to you is that digital archaeology, or the engagement with digitally rich, with archaeology-rich resources, is just one of the many resources that people use. And you have to look at it from people's point of view. People don't live in museums, they transit through them. They do lots of things in their everyday lives. One of them might be, at some point, visiting an archaeological site, using books or digital resources related to archaeology, but then they do many other things. So we're looking at the continuum rather than either you use digital or analog resources. So let's see how that kind of merging happened. Up to about 10 years ago, there was a physical world, and you had resources like objects, places, people, and their representations, and they only existed in the physical world. And then you had digital resources, which could be information about objects and location information, maps, personal information through the traces we leave, for example, when you buy things online, or when you tweet, use Facebook, and so on. But now these technologies are merging, and they're merging mainly because we use smartphones, most of us. Actually, a very recent research conducted collaboratively by the American Association of Museums and the Museum Association shows that nearly half of the population living in North America and Western Europe has smartphones. Now, this is a staggering number, and it's getting more and more. And that actually creates what we call now big data. So we're at a point that kind of big data is on us, and nobody actually has the skill to use it and mine it. So let me give you some examples from studies I've done. This is an 11-year-old pupil using a mobile phone which is administered by OCO at the National Maritime Museum. And what she can do is collect photographs, use it at specific points in the exhibition to find out more information using QR codes. She can record messages, she can text people, and all of that information goes on a website that then is available to be used at school. And that interaction at school also involves asking curators and other members of staff from the Maritime Museum questions. So there's a lot more interaction going on and a lot of content that is created by the pupils, which could be seen as heritage or archaeology-rich resources. Another study from the London Zoo. I collaborated with people from Birkbeck, the computer science department, to combine more traditional visitor studies methodologies with trails that people leave behind when they use mobile phones. The mobile phones were given to them, and so based on that we were able to look at those trails that people left as they went about their visit and compare them with elements of their expectations, the motivations, why they were in the space in the first place, and see those groupings that occur naturally as you analyze the data, how it compares to actual physical behaviors within space and what you can tell about that. So these are some of the projects that are already happening, and those projects actually happened 3 or 4 years back. And with these kinds of technologies, by the time you describe the technology, it's already obsolete. So we're talking about really fast-moving technologies. So to go back to the point I made earlier about the continuum of resources, and it's not just about digital or physical, and we're talking about the same people using those resources. What it seems to me that we need is to better understand the diversity of options that people have and the different levels of engagement, so that we make more informed decisions about which models are more appropriate for different institutions or different resources within the same institution, and also at different times and for different audiences. So I'm going to propose 2 main frameworks that come from public understanding of science. And I've also added the Einstein's ladder of citizen participation, because although it's quite old now, you'd be surprised how many of those models are underpinned by this work. And what Einstein tried to do was to actually demonstrate the power relationships that exist when people participate in order to make decisions. So with the first one, the Science for All expert group, this group was commissioned by the UK government to look at the relationship between science and society, and they also did a mapping exercise looking at the different approaches to public engagement with science. And that was back in 2010. A US-based group, the Center for the Advancement of Informal Science Education, or CASE, the inquiry group. This is funded by NSF money, National Science Foundation in the US. And they, to my view, they moved those frameworks a step forward, and I'll explain why. So the first framework coming from the UK, again, as I said before, it's based on a scoping exercise, so projects were actually looked at. And this is a framework that has been adopted by UCL's Public Engagement Unit as well. So with necessary adaptments, it can be used in different contexts. So please look beyond the content or the discipline. So we have different modes of public engagement, ranging from telling to consulting. The first 2 are telling and sharing, are institution-led. The aim of the first one is to promote a particular point of view and actually convince people of the value of that particular point of view. The second one assumes a kind of knowledge deficit in the users. So if only people had more information, they would surely make the right decisions, and that is the decisions we want them to make. Then involving, actually, you have people engaged from the very start, from the conception stage through to the running of the activity, evaluating it, and taking charge of that. So the aim is to actually involve people in order to improve the quality and also the impact that the activities have. And the last one is more based on dialogue and deliberation, that good decision making in mature democracies at least should be a process of deliberation and different points of view coming together. So the aim here is to improve the quality of the decisions that are made. Now, with this framework and any kind of those frameworks, the assumption is that there's something better. And the better thing is consulting, because of course we want people to live in a democratic society. But what we actually know from other work that has been done, looking at the case example, is that things are much more actually complex than that. And you'll find that it's something that the previous group also recognized, that even within the same communities, say scientists doing maths, they have ideas that are closer to telling, and also ideas that may be closer to consulting, and anything in between. So things are much fuzzier in real life. And how do we account for that? And how do we develop theory that reflects on what actually happens on the ground? So this group looked at, again, different projects, and they identified dimensions, different dimensions, and also milestones within those 3 dimensions. And what I think is really interesting about this one is that they didn't just look at the publics, but also at scientists as the public. And the fact that some of the activities could be targeted towards specialists, and the public could be specialists who may know nothing about, a mathematician may know nothing about, a particular area in physics. So they may be as ignorant as anybody else. So it raises the question, who is the public of public engagement activities? And so within this research framework I'd like to propose, some key questions that need to be addressed is, what are the goals for public engagement activities for the different publics? And the goals come both from the institution, and you cannot ignore that, but also people have motivations. We don't know enough about why people engage in the first place. What do they get out of it? How it relates to other things they do in their social life? Why do they care? And also we need to have a more nuanced understanding of what these publics are. It's appropriate as part of the public understanding of science, but when you're studying people, you need to look at people. We also don't know enough about the different elements of public engagement activities that can lead to good quality engagement. That's where I would disagree about good practice or best practice. I think it needs to be seen in the context of people's lives. There isn't just, it's kind of arbitrary. You have to look at some kind of context. There's no best practice, basically. We also need to look at the different spaces and their affordances. What kind of actions and interactions different types of environments afford? What kind of behaviors you can observe, And how can we tweak environments or create environments that create different types of engagement and responses? We cannot change people. Everybody who is in a relationship knows that. What we can do is change environments, and that's where we can intervene. And then again, go back to my original message that we have to look at engagement activities across the spectrum. And finally, so how does that takes us forward? This echoes a lot of the points that people made earlier, that this is a huge undertaking. We don't even, haven't even scratched the surface. We don't know how to even approach big data and what kind of analytics that involves. So it needs to be collaborative. There's no other way. And it needs to be multidisciplinary as well. We need other people to ask questions and make the questions we ask in research better and more, also cover things that we haven't even started asking yet because there are gaps in certain disciplines, gaps in knowledge and understanding. It needs to be theory-driven, and more importantly, it needs to create theory that describes the practice, what happens out there rather than what we would like to happen. Now, in the world that I inhabit research-wise, because I do research looking at learning in museums, but learning as a cultural process, there's a lot of work coming from sociocultural learning theories and also using an ecological framework that can bring different ideas together, different people together. It goes beyond constructivism, which is absolutely fine, but it still looks at learning through a psychological lens. We're still looking at one person. Even with social constructivism, it's kind of quite within that constraint. I often find that people do research or evaluation, and it's something that they do after the activity has ended. And there's so much out there. People leave behind, they leave their diaries, they collect things, there are things on Twitter and here and there. You can look at those resources from a research point of view. You don't need necessarily to create an interview protocol. And more importantly, they can be embedded in the actual technology. So for example, going back to the example at the zoo, you have mobile phones, and whether you want it or not, they just track you wherever you go. This data is there to be used. So you can actually use that. You can use tweets, you can use Facebook interactions, and so on. And what that does, it gives you access to kind of data that has never, ever been available before. It can give us insights into behaviors that it wasn't just possible to study up to 10 years ago. And it can look at change of behaviors over a long period of time, which again, we were not really good at doing that, partly because of the way the funding works. And also going back to a question asked earlier about how do we access all of that? Our community hasn't been very good at doing that. It's very fragmented, the picture. You have some journals, but practitioners don't have access to those to start with. And there isn't just a repository, something like a knowledge base where people can go and think about how do I design environments? What does research tell me about that? And I would encourage you to look at, again, there's a lot of science-related material, but if you look beyond the content, and I'm not suggesting that there aren't outcomes and processes and concepts that are discipline-specific, but there are quite a few that cut across disciplines. So the CASE website and also exhibit files has a lot of resources that can be used by people from different disciplines. Okay, that's my last slide. Thank you.